Here at WhyItTV, we believe that brands aren't just products you buy, they're stories. Stories shaped by history, culture, and a whole lot of struggle. And today, we're digging into the story of a brand that practically defines the word underdog, Pepsi. So, how does that happen? How does a company go bankrupt not once, but twice, and still end up becoming a global icon? I mean, that's really the heart of the Pepsi story, isn't it? It's not a simple story of winning. It's this incredible narrative of constant reinvention, of always being the challenger, and somehow surviving against all odds. So, where does a story like that even begin? Well, like a lot of classic American tales, this one starts in a small-town pharmacy, right at the turn of the 20th century, and the goal was actually pretty simple. Back in 1893, a pharmacist named Caleb Bradham, he wasn't dreaming of a global empire. He was just trying to help his customers. He created something called Brad's Drink. And get this, it was made with pepsin and cola nuts, and it was meant to help with digestion and boost energy. So it was really a functional, kind of medicinal drink first and a refreshment second. The name Pepsi Cola didn't even come along for another 5 years. Its roots are deep in that old-timey 19th century soda fountain world.
But what's really incredible is how fast that dream almost died. I mean, after World War I, sugar prices went completely haywire, and all that speculation led to bankruptcy in 1923. The company gets sold, and then, boom, it goes bankrupt again in 1931. It's like this pattern of just barely surviving, of near failure, was baked into Pepsi's DNA right from the start.
So how on earth do you survive that? Well, you do it with this. Right in the middle of the Great Depression, when people had absolutely nothing, Pepsi made a move that was just brilliant. See, Coca-Cola was selling its famous 6.5-ounce bottle for a nickel. Pepsi started using old 12-ounce beer bottles and sold them for the exact same price. This jingle became one of the most famous in history. And it wasn't selling a lifestyle or some fancy idea, it was a lifeline. Pure, simple value at a time when that's all that mattered. Okay, so survival, check. But being the cheap option will only get you so far. To really compete, to actually build something lasting, Pepsi had to be more than that. It needed an identity, and it found one by doing what it would do for the next century, positioning itself directly against the big guy, against Coca-Cola. And this was the real turning point. A marketing guy named Alan Patosh had this amazing insight. He said, let's stop talking about price, and let's start talking about people. He looked at the post-war baby boomers and saw a generation that was completely different. They were hopeful, they were young, they were all about the future. And out of that came the Pepsi generation. This campaign was a total breakthrough. Suddenly, they weren't selling a drink anymore. They were selling an identity. It was youth, it was excitement, it was the future, all in one bottle. And then came the knockout punch, the Pepsi Challenge. I mean, this was just so audacious. They literally set up tables in shopping malls, right out in public, and asked people a very simple question. Which one of these tastes better? And in these blind taste tests, again and again, more people chose Pepsi. This was huge. For the very first time, the underdog had actual proof that it could compete not just on price, but on the one thing that should matter most, the taste. And do you want to know the real impact? Coca-Cola was totally rattled. We now know that their own secret internal tests were confirming the exact same thing Pepsi was shouting from the rooftops in its ads. That pressure is a huge reason why, a few years down the road, Coke made one of the biggest marketing blunders of all time when it changed its formula and launched New Coke. Pepsi had officially gotten inside its rival's head. So from that point on, Pepsi just doubled down. It solidified that challenger identity by becoming a mirror for youth culture. And sometimes it reflected social changes that were, frankly, way ahead of their time. Okay, think about this. We're in the 1940s, decades before the civil rights movement really takes hold. And Pepsi's president, a guy named Walter Mack, looks around and sees that major American companies are either completely ignoring Black consumers or worse, using horrible racist stereotypes in their ads. So he does something radical. He hires an all-Black sales team to market Pepsi directly to that community. And from a business perspective, it was a massive success. Pepsi's market share just exploded in cities like Chicago. For the first time ever, it actually overtook Coke there. But, and this is a really important but, behind this seemingly progressive strategy, there was this deep, really troubling tension. Our sources show that in a private meeting with his white bottlers, who were terrified of losing white customers, Mack himself used a racist slur to try and calm them down. It's a shocking moment, and it's a stark reminder that even when a business decision looks forward-thinking on the surface, The reality underneath can be incredibly complex and contradictory. Then you get to the 80s and 90s, and Pepsi just dives headfirst into pop culture. This is when they launched the choice of a new generation. And how did they define that generation? By aligning themselves with the absolute biggest music stars on the entire planet. We're talking Michael Jackson, Tina Turner, Britney Spears, you name it. And these weren't just commercials anymore. They were full-blown cultural events. This is what cemented Pepsi's image as the cool, modern, exciting alternative. But here's the thing. Trying to be the voice of a generation is a really risky game. When you try to ride the wave of the cultural moment, well, sometimes ambition gets the better of you, and you can have a pretty spectacular wipeout. Which, of course, brings us to 2017, and that Kendall Jenner commercial. Pepsi saw a moment of intense political activism and protest happening, and they tried to tap into it. The problem was they just completely and totally misread the room, and the backlash was, well, it was immediate and it was fierce. And this tweet from Bernice King, the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., just perfectly captured why everyone was so outraged. It really cut to the heart of the accusation that Pepsi was taking decades of real, painful, dangerous struggle for civil rights and trivializing it, suggesting that all of these complex social problems could just be solved with a can of soda. So the key takeaway here is that the ad wasn't just a failure. It was seen as deeply offensive. Critics rightly pointed out that it was co-opting the visual language of serious protest movements, like Black Lives Matter, and using them as a kind of trendy backdrop. It basically stripped the activism of all its meaning and turned a real-life struggle into a very shallow marketing ploy. The ad was pulled in less than 24 hours. That Kendall Jenner ad was a huge stumble, for sure. But the truth is, the company's long-term survival was never really tied to the success or failure of a single commercial. In fact, the most important move for its future, that happened decades and decades earlier.
The year was 1965, and this is when Pepsi-Cola made what was probably the single most important strategic move in its entire history. It merged with Frito-Lay, the snack food company. And just like that, PepsiCo was born. This one decision completely changed the game, transforming it from just a beverage company into a massive food and beverage giant.
And this chart really shows you the long-term genius of that move. If you look at a huge, important market like India today, a whopping 80% of PepsiCo's revenue comes from snacks, not drinks. We all talk about the cola wars, but the real war, the one for long-term market dominance, that was won by looking beyond the bottle. And that really brings us to where we are today. The story of PepsiCo is, of course, far from over. And the challenges of staying relevant now are maybe more complex than they've ever been. I mean, think about it. The company now has to navigate this world where consumers are way more health conscious. They're demanding products and flavors that are tailored specifically to their local tastes. And they're engaging with brands almost entirely online. So that constant need to adapt and reinvent, the very thing that defined Pepsi's early days of survival, is still the core challenge today. So this has been one lens on the story of Pepsi. Here at WhyItTV, we believe every topic deserves to be understood from multiple angles, which is why we explore them through different formats. We really hope you'll continue the exploration with us. And just so you know, this explainer was created in partnership with AI, which helps our team research and pull together these deeper stories faster. So when you look back, the story of Pepsi is really this incredible tale of survival, of identity, and constant adaptation. But it does leave us with one last big question to think about. What does it actually mean for a brand's identity when the very product it was named for is no longer the main event?